Okay, today we're looking at Aristotle's Metaphysics. There are a lot of texts that are left from Aristotle, and of course he has had a massive influence on the development of thought, and this is partly because a lot of his work has survived, fortunately. Just like Plato, a lot of his work has survived as well, or certainly the Republic has survived, whereas a lot of the pre-Socratics, we've got very little left from them, sadly. And I think that is very sad, because I actually think that these guys were really interesting thinkers. They really were. But with Aristotle, he's another very interesting thinker, and I'm using the W.D. Ross translation of his Metaphysics, and I've only taken these ideas from the very first book of Aristotle's Metaphysics, which is Big Alpha and Little Alpha. I think that's what we call them, Big Alpha and Little Alpha. Yeah, and that's all I've taken this from. But in the next class, because I want to do another one on Aristotle, I want to look at Aristotle's idea of what substance is, what essence is, what's at the basis of reality, what stuff is at the basis of reality. And I want to look at that in another class, and I know that one of the books at the end of the Metaphysics, book Zeta, deals with this in detail, so we'll look at that in another class. But we start by looking at types of knowledge according to Aristotle, and he points out that there's knowledge from sense perception, which is perhaps the most basic kind of knowledge, but then there's also knowledge from memory. You can have memories, of course we all do, we all have memories of different things we have already perceived with our senses, and memory, several memories of the same thing, the same object, is precisely what produces our capacity for experience. We're able to experience the world because of this memory. It's because of this memory, having memories of different things, that we can experience things. And experience, what is experience? Well, experience is knowledge of individuals, knowledge of particular things. We remember individual things, specific things, in other words, many different things. And from these many notions, from these many different things that we experience, that we gain in experience, we can make a leap. We can start to gain knowledge of universals, because we can apply one universal judgment about a class of objects. And this is what we're doing in art and science, according to Aristotle. So in science, we take a lot of different experiences, perhaps experiences of experiments, where we have tested different ideas, and using those experiments, we're able to make one judgment about a whole class of things. For example, we're able to say that something like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, and we get this idea, this notion, from experience. We get this idea from the memory of watching water boil again and again and again at that temperature when the mercury hits 100 degrees. And so this is knowledge of universals, and of course this is some kind of high type of knowledge when compared with knowledge from sense perception, which is perhaps the most basic. And so what is wisdom? What is knowledge? Well, Aristotle deals with these difficult questions straight away, and he gives you an answer which I think a lot of people would agree with. He says that wisdom is knowledge of first principles. In other words, knowledge of causes, first principles and causes. Because knowing the why of something, if you want to know the why of something, if you want to be able to explain something like a chair or a table, if you want to be able to explain these things, you must know it. And how do you know a table or know a chair? Well, you know something when you know its cause, when you know its first principles, its cause. Knowing the why of something is knowing the cause of something. And as I say, I think a lot of you would probably agree with this. But what is a cause? Because we will see down here that Aristotle gives us at least 4 different types of causes, And he considers, and by the way, perhaps not best to translate this ancient Greek word as cause, because it's not exactly how we understand cause nowadays, with things like, with ideas like cause and effect and things like that, and causality. It might be better to translate this word as explanation. Yeah, it might be better. And so always keep that in mind, and you need to always do this with the ancient Greeks, because you're not sure exactly how we would translate that word nowadays, okay? And so he mentions that the wise man knows all things, but not each of them in detail. And so we get this idea that when we're talking about knowledge of first principles or knowledge of causes, we're talking about knowledge of everything, but not knowledge of, when we're talking about knowledge of universals, and not knowledge of particulars, of, not knowing things in detail, the individual things in detail, but knowing all things, yeah, knowing the big picture, you might say, understanding the big picture. And so if I take a example from, say, science, yeah, you might think that somebody knows many things, knows all things, when he has a great understanding of physics and chemistry, yeah, and biology. You might think, well, this is a wise man. This is a man who knows many things, because he has an excellent understanding of the laws of nature, yeah, of the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the laws of biology, the laws of nature, yeah. And you might see how, you might agree with Aristotle here, that such a person knows a lot about everything, but he might not know many things about the things